Почему они поют драконью песню? Чтоб напомнить, что дед его был драконоборцем.
Hello, and welcome to Media-eval, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What do they get right? What do they get wrong? And what do they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past? I'm Sarah Ifft, a medieval historian, and today I'll be talking about the Russian film I Am Dragon with guest Christine Fredrickson. Hi, Christine.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. So, would you like to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and about why you selected this particular movie?
Sure. I don't have any formal training, anything medieval or anything like that. Growing up, I always really liked fantasy books, read tons of them. So I always kind of had an interest in the time period and liked movies like Lord of the Rings and some of those.
Mm-hmm.
This was a movie that someone in an online group I'm in found, and they said, well, it has subtitles, but it looks like it's about a woman having sex with a dragon. Does anyone want to watch this? So I said, of course I do. And so I think like 5 of us all like coordinated a time to sit at the same time and watch it and just message back and forth while we watched it. And I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I expected to. I will sometimes watch things because they're good, bad, they're funny how bad they are, like the recent Cats movie. But this I actually enjoyed. So I was surprised by that. And so it's sort of been on my radar as something that would be fun to talk about, but that I'm not taking away like from someone who's knowledgeable because it's all made up, you know? And I don't want to take away like the Lord of the Rings episode from someone who's a bigger fan. But I'm like, no one's heard of this. I can, I don't have to be like appropriately dedicated. I can say whatever I want about it. So, yeah.
You probably have more opinions about this movie than most Americans, at least.
Right. They've never heard of it, so I'm sad. I'm the authority in the room, honestly, because I've seen it twice now.
Exactly. So we're bringing knowledge to people about this movie.
Mm-hmm.
So it came out in 2015. I Am Dragon is the English title.
Mm-hmm.
The Russian title apparently just translates to He's a Dragon.
Mm-hmm. And I looked on IMDb because it's always fun for foreign language films to see what they come up with. Most of them are I Am Dragon or just the word dragon. But Germany's was Dragon - Love is a Scary Tale. And then the other one I really liked was France's, which is The Dragon Inside Me.
That's very much what I would guess France would come up with.
Right, and that reminded me of like the old Arrested Development when Tobias had the man inside me, and there was all this sort of innuendo in it of that he was secretly gay but wasn't coming out, but the wording just in his writing was very clear. So I thought that was a funny wording of like, is it talking about him or her? Like they're gonna have sex. Who's the dragon inside? So I thought that was just an interesting title, and I guess their tagline officially was "Love is a Scary Tale." So with a T-A-L-E, not T-A-I-L, but I mean both work.
I was going to say, it could have gone either, though I assume that pun does not necessarily work in Russian.
That's true. It's probably pretty earnest.
Right. This is based on a novel called The Ritual by Marina and Sergei Chechenko, who I am not familiar with. Apparently some of their books have been translated into English, though I don't think this one has. And it stars, I apologize to any listeners who actually know Russian if I am butchering names here. This is not one of my research languages. but Maria Poezaiva as Mira, who was born in 1989. I checked this because I thought in this movie she looked like she was 14,
Mm-hmm.
but she was not. She was in her mid-20s. And then Matvey Likov as Arman, a man who looks so much like Robert Pattinson.
I don't think he does, but he definitely plays that role in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's part because there's similarities in the role, but it's also that at some point just, I don't know, maybe it's not exactly his physical appearance, but just something about
His expression more, I feel like.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I want to eat you and I'm not in control, but oh man, it's hard being a man dragon vampire.
Yeah, and so maybe that's what it is. Yeah. But just at some point I was like, who does this remind me of? And then I'm like, Robert Pattinson, that's who this person reminds me of.
There you have it.
Yeah. So the first main section, the enumeratio section, is where we'll have a recap and just kind of general discussion of the film. So a brief recap to just orient us. In a land that had once been plagued by dragons who stole women, Miroslava, the daughter of the Duke, is about to marry Igor, the grandson of the Dragon Slayer. They think that singing the old ritual song is a great idea, and this summons a dragon who takes Mira to an island. She is accompanied there only by a mysterious man with no name, to whom she gives the name Arman. Arman, as it turns out, is the dragon, in human form, who is desperately trying to live as a man and control the dragon inside him. Igor comes to rescue her, but as only a man who is loved by a woman on the island can reach it, he is unable to find the island since Mira is falling in love with Arman. However, out of fear of Arman's dragon self, she leaves the island. About to marry Igor, she realizes that she does not love him, which makes sense because increasingly he's awful, and sings the ritual song to summon Arman. By showing him no fear, she enables him to stay in control as a dragon. We end with the couple living happily on the island with their young daughter, and Mira flying on the back of her dragon husband.
Yeah, that's the movie.
Yeah.
I thought one thing, the first time I watched it, I wasn't clear on. Then the second time I figured out, because I was trying to figure out why are they singing this song if, like, historically this makes dragons come, like, steal brides before they can even get married. Like, why, how are you guys burying children? Why is everyone not dead? And, like, it's not just a bunch of old men that, like, well, I was going to get married and I sung a song and now my wife is eaten by a dragon. But they said that they only did it because it's the grandson. And they don't do that for anyone else's marriages. But the first time I was like, this doesn't make any sense. So I guess the dad must have already been married before the granddad killed the dragon. Otherwise, the dad wouldn't have had a kid because his wife would have been, like, scooped up too.
I'm a little unclear as to exactly how the system worked originally. There's clearly some situation where there are these women who they sing this ritual song and that summons a dragon, and then the dragon comes and gets them.
Right.
It can't be all women when they get married, or they would have completely died out.
Yeah, they said, like, oh, because they asked, why are we singing this song for a wedding? And then they said, oh, well, it's an honor because his granddad was the dragon slayer. But yeah, I don't know when they did it normally. I don't know if it was, like, summer solstice, let's kill a woman, or if it was, you know, once every 10 years, or, you know, when that happened originally. It wasn't super clear, I agree.
Yeah, so my guess is that it's something like there's some amount of times per year or something, or once a year, whatever it is, that, yeah, they have some women that they kill.
Yeah, you know. And they have them, it's like that, like, Viking funeral type boat thing, where they're, like, laying in it, and they're just like, well, I'll just lay in the canoe, and either my husband will pull me across an entire lake by a rope, and then get me out of the boat, or a dragon will eat me. But I feel like there's just so much chance you're going to get splashed on, you get wet, it's snowing. Like, how many people just get sick from that, you know?
Yeah, I would not want to have that as just a way to get married. No. It sounds awful.
And, you know, like, it had the sides were up, so she couldn't see anything. She could just see the sky.
Yeah.
So the whole time you're just, like, laying there, like, I wonder how close I am to the shore. Can I look up? Am I close? No, I can't look up. There's a whole thing. I would be so stressed out. I feel like we'd be claustrophobic.
Oh, yeah, no, it sounds so anxiety-producing and weird.
Yeah. I don't know how they got all those people to go lay in the boats when the dragon did come every time. Maybe they tied them up.
Right, and we do see some of the women who are being basically sacrificed to the dragons.
Yeah.
And that at least like it seems like a couple of them are actually weirdly chill about it, but at least one is protesting.
Yeah.
So it's a weird dynamic.
Yeah, and they make it sound so long ago, but then they're like, oh yeah, it was his grandfather. So it was like, so this was like, what, 40, 50 years ago. You guys just very recently
Right.
stopped regular human sacrifice. Like,
Right.
recently. So that was a little bit weird. But yeah, I really liked this movie a lot. I liked that when she was on the island, she was trying to convince Armand to help her leave and escape the dragon, and kept calling him a coward.
Yeah.
Like, well, help me. Like, there's driftwood. We'll make a boat. Like, let's figure out what to do here. And then as she's getting to know him, she throughout is asking him things and finding ways to continue to kind of send flares for help. Like, she gets him to show her, like, he mentions that he can see the wind moving, and she asks him to show her, and he sends up a bunch of, like, flower petals, and that's supposed to be all romantic, but it's also like, oh wow, there's a huge thing of flower petals in the sky, maybe this will help someone rescue me. And then later she's like, I want to see the wind, let's make a kite. And then she sends it off, and she's like, well, maybe someone will rescue me. And then again later, she, what was the third thing? Oh, the fireworks. She has him do fireworks.
Right.
And by then she's kind of falling for him, but she's really doing her best to, like, get out of the situation. Because when he starts to turn to a dragon, he just
he's very active.
Yeah, and he kind of lights on fire. So even if she likes him, it's kind of like, I might just get burned to death by laying near you when you, like, turn to a dragon. So...
Right. And also, every time she touches him, that sets off the dragonness.
Right. Yeah, and I really liked that was, I mean, because they end up revealing that the whole way that dragons reproduce is they take a woman and lay her on, like, a special, like, stone thing, and then they burn her to death, and then from the ashes...
Great method of reproduction.
Like, comes a little baby dragon kid, which we don't really know if there's girl dragon kids or not. It only references, like, he just uses the male, pronoun when he references his dad,
right.
Like, my ancestors. But, like, so that's basically, like, if he starts to get turned on because he touches anyone, he's replacing sperm with fire. Like, that's how he's just essentially ejaculating fire on to a woman until she dies, and then that causes the reproduction. His DNA's getting in there somehow. Like, it's just, like, magical fire ejaculate all over.
Yeah, which is extremely disturbing.
Right! Like,
as a method of reproduction.
Honestly, even if you didn't die in the process, like, that's... I wouldn't agree to that. I'd be asking for, let's see other people.
I'm not sure if I were her, I would have wanted to risk ultimately, like, having penetrative sex with this man, to be honest. Right. I think I would have been worried, but she apparently does.
Right, yeah, they managed to have a kid and she's not on fire or dead, so...
Yeah, so I guess it worked out.
I guess that is why love is a scary tale, honestly. But
she's taking a lot of risks here.
I kept waiting for her to actually, like, have sex with him as a dragon, or, like, in the sky or something, and it never happens, and it was a little bit disappointing. Like, not that that was something that I would personally find attractive, more just, like, it would just be so bizarre. Like, it'd be like,
oh, like, have the courage of your convictions.
Yeah, like, let's just go for it. The dragon inside you, come on.
Yeah, we want to see the dragon inside you. I mean, do we? But...
But yeah, I ultimately really liked that she had a lot of agency, and she was being very intelligent the whole time. And then ultimately she made her own choice in the end of what she wanted. Although it seems like they were still pretty isolated, which is a bummer. Like, if you can control being a dragon, why doesn't he just go live in the town? And, like, she's just like, oh, never mind. This guy killed the dragon, don't worry about it. And then, like, you never see him be a dragon again.
So my theory about that is that standing up in the middle of your wedding and yelling, "No, I love the dragon," is, like, completely, like, wrecking your reputation in this village forever. And honestly, the biggest surprise is that her dad is so chill about this.
Yeah.
It's like, cool, I guess that's what you want. I'm happy for you, daughter. While he's just, like, standing there. And it's like, I feel like you should be more concerned about this as a parent.
Right. Like, go love, but, like, he's not the same species. And the last time he was within 2 feet of her, like, she almost burned her earth. So, There's a level of realism here that we need to have about how this relationship will turn out.
Right, and dragons have been taking women from their town and murdering them only about 50 years ago, I assume at least once a year.
Right.
And so I think the amount of prejudice that he would face, and that both of them would probably face, and their kid in this village, is intense.
That's true. And you know what? I wonder if they take people from other villages too, because Armand he does not appear to be 50. So he was either he was birthed more recently, or he ages very slowly. I don't really know. Like, do dragons just get as bigger and bigger for thousands of years until they turn as big as the island? Like, I don't. I mean, not that they have to really know all that, but the timeline didn't quite add up. I wonder if what if there's just another island that he's been taking women from, but he's like, oh no, I would never take them from your islands. I don't think he was, but that would be an interesting twist.
Yeah, I was assuming that it was the same because the stories about the dragon slayers seemed like they lined up, so I was assuming dragons just don't age at the same rate as humans.
That's probably it. Just like Edward. It's all coming together.
Just like Edward. And then they've got this weird kid.
Right? I also liked that he didn't really want to be a dragon, and with that he didn't want to kill people, even though he'd always lived like in isolation. Like, he was like, I'm not just gonna go like scoop people and murder them. He chose like to basically be alone and be like, a little monk in solitude. I'm now misrepresenting monks. I apologize. This is not the right audience for that. But but he's living in this like complete solitude and celibacy, and instead of risking hurting someone. So I did like that about him. Of like, he really didn't want to hurt someone. As far as like a take on the Beauty and the Beast type story, versus you came and you took a flower, so I'm gonna like imprison you forever. Like, it was not that type of situation, but then that one song like makes him turn into a dragon and have no control.
Right, and it's also, the movie really is about his journey toward finding a greater humanity, and there's this whole bit where she carves this wood flute-like thing and gives it to him, and he then plays the flute basically as a way to stop himself from turning into a dragon. And to kind of keep his humanity, he like uses this flute, which I think is really interesting as like both a strategy, but also the sign of how much he wants this.
Right. Well, and there's all this philosophy of like art being so intrinsic to what makes humans unique, or that that kind of thought. So that was a cool thing. And I mean, his own desire and willingness to change and to be in control. Like, he's demonstrating wanting to improve himself, wanting to be different, and actively taking steps to do that, versus just being like, well, she fell in love with me even though I kidnapped people.
Right.
Like, he's more likable, and he's more likable too because he was isolated and lonely. But he's still like, I'd take you back if like I wouldn't like I could fly and let you. And then finally he's like, I'm gonna like trap myself like under like a boulder or whatever he did, so I can't stop you from leaving. I want to just let you go. But before that, it's not like he was forcing her to be there, versus the Beauty and the Beast story, where it's like, no, until then, like, you're trapped. They just finally came up with a plan of like, oh, he'll actually find the islands. You can actually go get to him now. Like, take your chance. This is the first chance you've had to leave.
Yeah, and the other thing that I like about this is, compared with the Beauty and the Beast narrative, in addition to the obvious like Stockholm kind of stuff about Beauty and the Beast, is that also tends to have an element of her, or a real emphasis on her changing him. And I liked this, that she obviously plays an important role, but it's very much about the fact that he's also working on himself in a really deep way throughout. That it's like, so it's like less of the like woman changing the man narrative. It's like maybe the woman's like helpful and kind of an inspiration, but also he's going to therapy.
Yeah, exactly. And she ultimately is making her own choices. She's not stuck with him. And she doesn't just immediately like give up either. But yeah, he definitely was a much more likable character. And it was more just someone needed to come along that wasn't afraid of him, to be like, hey, have you heard of music? Like, hey, have you heard of like having a conversation or friendship? Because his dad sounded like he was awful. He just like was flying around being dragon all the time, didn't do anything with him. And then he like learns to make puppets and has like puppet shows, and he like communicates through art, which is really cool. And it's just a really pretty movie. I really
It is, yeah.
liked
The puppets are
everything.
gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also he actually notes that like it's the puppets that basically make him change his mind, because initially like his dad's the only person he knows, and he's like, I want to be like my dad, so that means I guess being a dragon. And then because he like comes across these puppets and I think starts making his own as well, he then decides not to become a dragon. And the one thing that's interesting about his dad is that his dad's like clearly a little disappointed, but you can't force somebody to become a dragon, so his dad's like kind of chill about it. And that's like the one nice thing that we can say about his dad, who has murdered multiple women.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. They managed to find all of these like really great like a whole merchant ship of like fine silks and dresses like apparently crashed against the island, but none of it ever floated away at any point because they go down to like
Yes.
like, hey, there's some like shipwreck. Let's see if there's anything good. And they completely do up the whole place, and it's gorgeous. It's really fun to see, like them dancing around with new dresses and like decorating and like making his house a home, and her kind of
nice.
yeah, it's really pretty, and she's kind of making peace with things, but the whole time she's still planning, if I can get out and I can see my family again, how am I going to do that? So I liked it.
Yeah, it's very impressive that all of the textiles stayed in such good shape despite being like in shipwrecks. So that's also nice. There also is like that. So there's like that scene with him and the flower petals, which totally looks like it's like a music video of some kind. Like there's like the dramatic swelling music as you see like him and his like bare chest and the flower petals. It's like a really interesting visual.
He does have a bare chest quite a bit of the time. Yeah, I can confirm.
Like pretty much almost all the time.
Yeah. Yes, as he should, obviously.
Yeah.
I like too that it's made clear like she felt obligated to marry the Igor, her bridegroom, because he was the grandson of the Dragon Slayer. But then like he doesn't love her, she doesn't love him, and it seems like he's kind of greedy about it. Like it's not necessary, like because he wants to be the Duke.
Yeah.
So you do get to see like he was going to give up looking for her, and then he's like, no, I'm not going to slay the dragon. It's fine. Let's just go back, which she's happy about. But like he's not brave. He's not truly a hero.
Yeah, I mean, he's just doing it out of like cowardice and laziness as opposed to anything else. Yeah.
And then when she says, "Oh, I love the dragon," comes. He tries to shoot it to stop her from leaving. And it's like, no, the dragon and her, like, they're going to go hang out. Like, don't make her, like, fall to her death right now. Like, don't be a dick about this.
Right. Also, he's got this one attendant who it's sort of half-heartedly implied at a couple of points is actually in love with Mira's sister, Yaroslava, and that they might have a thing for each other. And when Igor is about to try to shoot the dragon, he, like, stops him and punches him in the face.
Yes.
It's like, so that's fun.
Yeah, really, I mean, being supportive. There was one thing I like, one of the first lines that they had, I thought were pretty funny. Like, it was trying to be dramatic, but it was just, it was visually very pretty, but the wording didn't work for me. And I don't know if this is more successful in another language, obviously with it being like a translation. But the first line, like one of the first lines is talking about like where everyone's sad and it's snowy, like when they're just like, feeding people dragons and stuff before they're like, maybe we should stop doing that. But like how they describe it is they had tears where their eyes should have been. They had fear where their hearts should have been. They had death where the sky should have been. And I mean, they still had eyes. Like,
yeah, it's a little. It just feels like a lot. Like it feels just a little like over dramatic.
Yeah, it didn't quite earn that, especially with like it being a more kind of lighthearted, like romantic movie. Like opening with that, it's like, okay, you can calm down. It's fine.
Right.
But I did kind of laugh at that, and then was expecting it to be a much worse movie. But then like, they just kind of like they just tried a little too hard here. But then they like actually delivered like a really enjoyable movie throughout that.
Yeah, and I will say definitely, like, there were definitely moments for me where things about the dialogue didn't quite hit, but I don't know how many of those are translation issues.
Right, definitely the dialogue itself was the weakest, but they... Yeah. I feel like they did a decent job acting it. Like, you felt like they did like each other, and,
Yeah.
It was just really pretty. Like, I really liked all the decorations. It was wonderful. And there's a creepy pet the whole time. It was like, I think you called it a lemur. I
Yes,
guess it
I
is
started
lemur,
describing this in my original notes as I was taking it as the upsetting lemur.
Yeah.
Um,
Because it, like, maybe was going to eat her first off, and then he's like, maybe just don't eat this girl. I might hang with her.
right. Well, I think he tells her, like, don't throw a rock when she first, like, basically hears him as this disembodied voice and doesn't yet know he's the dragon.
Mm-hmm.
He says, no, don't throw a rock at it. Like, just lie there and be still. And then the upsetting lemur kind of comes over and smells her, and then runs off.
But, like, she has to expose her throat to it. He's like, turn
Yeah,
your
which
head down.
seems
Like, this is pretty severe. I would not do that. Like, we have to draw a line here. Strange voice
Yeah.
coming through the side of the cave. Like, I don't
Right?
know who you are.
Right. And that's actually one of the ways that she figures out that he's the dragon is because the upsetting lemur obeys him
Mm-hmm.
and is clearly like his pet. And so she's like, wait, like you're not just another captive here.
Right.
You're something different.
Mm-hmm.
And we also then have a lot of like transformation with the upsetting lemur, which is indicated in my notes as I stopped calling it the upsetting lemur. And I think at some point I called it the upset lemur.
Yes.
Because the lemur, it's so great. It's great when they're doing the redecorating that she has to teach the lemur that it can't run on the carpet, which is very relatable to everyone who has ever had pets.
Mm-hmm.
That you have like things that you maybe don't want your like pet to like be on top of or something like that, and then you have to like struggle with that because they're not on board. And the lemur also discovers that she's got like a go bag and starts going through it, and she has to explain to the lemur like, oh, I really don't want to have to go, but I am afraid about him turning into a dragon and killing me.
Right.
And the lemur's like, and then the lemur's very sad when she leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually says to the lemur, don't come after me, stay, you're the only thing that Armand has, which is so sweet.
Yeah. It was very endearing. I hated it up until that moment. Like, it's just like the big yellow eyes. I was like, no, you sniffed her throat earlier. Like, you keep back. But, you know, it turned out to be a nice lemur in the end.
Yeah, and at the end, also, they have this kid. The lemur loves this kid so much. Like, in fact, like, the lemur babysits.
Yeah, like, what a great gig. You're just like, here,
Yeah.
have a dragon fruit, the main fruit on this island that's literally made of the body of a dead dragon.
Yeah, no, so the lemur really grew on me.
Oh, yeah. There's a turning
as a part
point.
of this film. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to make a note about the kid, too. So they have this kid, we assume eventually produced by normal human biological reproductive means. And the reveal of the kid is interesting because so we see basically so that Mira comes back with the dragon. She like jumps up in the middle of her wedding and she sings the ritual song, and the dragon comes and gets her. And then she indicates to the dragon that she's not afraid of him, and she touches him, and then he starts like nuzzling her in dragon form, which is very cute. Because I guess that's the dream. Is she doesn't actually fuck the dragon. The dream is to have like a hot guy, but then who also is a cool pet dragon.
It'd kind of be like dating someone that like can turn to a plane. You know, you're like, look, let's get anywhere we need to go. It's really like there's like the 50 Shades of Grey and all that stuff of like, oh my gosh, he's rich, he's got a plane, he's got this, he has a helicopter. That's really what she's getting here. Is she's getting a guy that there's no competition because he's alone, like on like a big rock, and like she can travel now whenever she wants, no questions asked.
It's like the blend between that and Love on a Leash.
Yes.
Because she also basically has like a pet.
Yes.
But which is also her husband.
Yeah, you know, why not?
It's just bigger than a golden retriever.
Yeah. But it seems like at the end there, I mean, based on the very, very end, which is where I really thought we were going to see some like full-on sex, was like, she's like, oh, kid, I love you. Hey, lemur, let's babysit. And then she like runs out and she like jumps into the air, and then she's like riding the dragon, and so they're just like cruising around the sky having a grand old time. But I was expecting like them to like have sex in midair and then like him to transform before like they hit the ground, something like that, or like just, or not even sex, but just like a really intense makeout session of like, oh, we're gonna like really like, you know, we have to kind of escalate, this is our kink now, like we've got to have
weird games of sex.
Yeah. Like, oh, look how much I trust you. This is what we do now. Which I thought would have been kind of exciting. And then, like, they swoop out. But she just kind of, like, hops, and then it's like, oh, no, it's cool. He's a dragon. Like, we're just going to, like, go have a ride. So I was hoping that was going to get a little bit more intense before he transformed, and it didn't.
Yeah.
But that was an exciting moment for me.
My interpretation also is definitely that, because she says something about wanting to travel, so my interpretation is definitely that she climbs on him and then they go to, like, Paris for a weekend.
Oh, yeah.
While the lemur's babysitting, and then they just, like, he, like, turns into a human, like, right as they land, and they, like, land maybe a little bit outside the city, like, if you're, like, on, like, a Ryanair flight, and then you go on in, and then you just, like, chill in Paris for a weekend, and then he, like, dragons on up, and you go home.
Oh, yeah. It's exactly like having a private plane, but he gets a really good workout, too.
Exactly.
I think you have to account for weather more, though, You don't want to be flying on a dragon in, like, the hail.
True. Yeah, they probably stay home more in the winter. Or maybe they go to, like, warmer climates because they're in, like, fake Russia or something.
Yeah,
so.
It was filmed in Bulgaria, but appears to be set in Russia, like, based off the names and some of those things. And I mean, that just being, like, the language they're speaking.
Right. And I think the authors of the original novel, I believe, are Ukrainian, but usually write in Russian, if I'm remembering correctly.
Got it. I'm sure you're right about that, because I never looked it up. So you're more right than I am.
There was something related to that I think they do not actually consider themselves Russian exactly, but I think they write in Russian.
Yeah, okay. So then, as far as this whole, like, the dragon being, like, a sexual awakening thing, you had in your notes that it was, like, both of their first time, like, it was his first time kidnapping a woman, and it was her
and
first
also
time
flying away from the island, I think, yeah.
Oh, okay. I interpreted your note as, like, oh my god, it's my first time kidnapping a woman, like, this is so great. We're bonding together, this is my first time being kidnapped. But the flying thing makes more sense and is a little bit less creepy.
Yeah, I was reading it as flying instead of kidnapping, because he's like, I guess he's flown before, but I don't think he's really flown away from the island. And it seems like he even tries to basically trap himself when he turns into a dragon, so he's not even flying around, like, near the island, necessarily.
Right, because he doesn't want to hurt anyone, and he can't control that. Okay, that makes sense. I was like, wow, you're really on board with this piece of their, like, oh my gosh, the shared moment we had of kidnapping. So, I mean,
so it's more like the flying. It's like, okay, we get it. The flying, it's like an orgasm. It's fine.
Right. Well, and then that's kind of like at the end, he's no longer afraid of his sexuality. And she's not like, they're like, okay, I feel safe with you. We can finally just do it. And then he can control his dragon from then on, Then he can fly solo. He can, so it's really like this, like, maybe, raised in the suppressive environment.
But she can't fly solo.
No. Because of the patriarchy.
Exactly.
Which is why in the future we invent machines like planes and dildos to help with these things.
The downfall of the patriarchy.
Exactly. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting extension of that, of like, oh, well, now I'm not afraid of you as a dragon, so I can touch you whenever I want. And he's like, well, I'm not going to, like, afraid I'm going to eat you as a dragon, so I can actually enjoy this without, like, losing my full head and, like, having no sentience anymore. But, so here was the alternate. When I saw it the second time, this was my alternate interpretation, or not interpretation, because it's obviously not true, it's a happy ending, but in the back of my mind, I thought, what if they can't reproduce normally? And this is actually, like, a love story about her, like, the Stockholm Syndrome is real, and she has become, like, that, when a kidnapper kidnaps someone and they end up, like, falling for them and help them. Like, they could have just
they've kidnapped this, like,
a different woman. No, they could have kidnapped a woman and burned her together. And so that kid's not related to her. And this is, like, their adopted child. So that's the alternate. If you just put some horror music over the ends, and then just like, it turned out he couldn't create children the normal way, so we had to go find someone to help us. Like, that could have been the alternate.
Oh, God.
And then they're like, oh, I wish we had another child. I wish we had a son. And then they go, like, kidnap another woman. Maybe someone that was rude to her back when she was, like, living with the rest of the people. And then
she seems to not be that into her sister. I'm a little worried about her.
Yeah, she could be, if they, like, want a third kid, they're like, you know what? She had it coming. Because it seems, I mean, they're talking about all these dragon attacks, like, as it's like kind of a thing, but then it seems like there's only one kid produced from it. So I wonder how often like they're shooting blanks, or if they just die young because they don't fly. And he's like, "You're supposed to be a dragon, like go jump off this cliff," and then like has he had like 40 kids before he just goes flat and never turned into a dragon?
Yeah, that's true. I'm curious about how that works. Or I was wondering if there's actually more islands with other dragons somewhere that at some
Yeah,
point somebody might have to worry about.
that's true.
Like, because I think that happens with like male lions, right? That they
Mm-hmm.
like take off and do their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if dragons were like that, and there's another dragon who has an island that like has a different cluster of villages that he murders women in.
Right. Although I guess that this, based on it seeming to be a species gene that can only like pass from male to male because of the means of reproduction, I guess there would be no women dragons.
Which is interesting because since they then produce, we assume, through sex in a normal human way, they have a daughter.
Which I think is our proof that my horror story version didn't happen, because they produced a daughter. So I think that's our way to know for sure it's not like some creepy kidnapping cult. And they're actually just banging.
Yeah, but then can the daughter turn into a dragon when she grows up?
We don't know. We don't know if she'll be the first.
And if so, could she reproduce by murdering men?
Ooh. What would be, because it would be, I guess, would she like eat them? Because he's spitting fire out of his mouth. So they're using the mouth as like the sex organ instead of using a genital region. So she would have to eat them.
So she could eat men and then would still, unfortunately, have to go through childbirth, which seems vaguely unfair.
Well,
but
maybe she'd vomit out egg, because it's all happening up here. I was just saying my mouth. That's serving as the reproductive region, at least for the male dragon. So she would eat a man and then spit out his bones, clean up after, and then a few weeks later, then she'd spit out an egg baby. Yeah. And then just sit on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that's going to be the sequel. We'll have to see. It's been a few years. I hope they have one. I would love to find it. I wonder if there's a sequel to the book. And now that I'm aware that it's a book, I'm going to look that up after this, I think, and find out.
Yeah. I also love that the little kid totally asks her dad, where do dragon babies come from?
Yeah.
And this dude, you can tell that he's isolated from civilization and no one's ever taught him anything about parenting, because he starts by, he's like, well, so there used to be this creepy ritual, and then Mira shows up and is like, she's nice about it, but you can tell she's kind of like, so you're not about to tell our daughter about a bunch of women being murdered, or B, like fully explain sex to a 3-year-old, right? You're not going to do those things? Okay.
Yeah, honey, let's just go on a flight real quick. The lemur can explain sex. It's fine.
The lemur is probably who's going to get tasked with doing the sex talk for this poor kid.
Really just put it off as long as possible. And then, does she say dragon babies? She doesn't just say where baby's from. She asks where dragon babies are from?
I think she says dragon babies or baby dragons or something. Okay.
So then that's not like, are these two whole different conversations though?
Right.
Like, why is she making that distinction? Is she like, you are other than me, father? Or, mother is other, she is the human?
Right. Which is interesting also because she's never met anybody else as far as we know, either human or dragon.
Unless she goes on these weekend getaways with them.
Right. Which I'm sure she at least will when she's older. Yeah. If I were them, I maybe wouldn't take her now because I feel like she wouldn't be good at not telling people, like, I'm a dragon.
That's true. I was thinking just falling, but yeah, if she survived the flight, then she would just totally mouth out and tell everyone about it.
Yeah, I assumed that if they were flying with her, they'd, like, baby Bjorn her.
That's a good point. They probably just wouldn't be like, hope your arms are strong, kid. Although it did start by a
maybe that's
dragon
like their
dad,
fifth kid and they lost the first 4.
What?
Maybe that's like their 5th kid and they lost the first 4.
I'm like, well, we've got time. Let's go have sex again. I mean, they do have, like, the whole thing was like, oh, the dragon, like, just falls off the cliff. And he's like, ah, dang, I'm a dragon. So, I mean, that could be, like, that is kind of the baby bird. Like, you just shove him out the nest and be like, deal with it.
Right, yeah, which is, I mean, you said this before, like, it raises the question, like, if you, like, what happens if you don't turn? Yeah. Like, does that happen?
Which probably it does, because that's how, like, birds stay strong, is they, like, push them out, and then the weakest genes don't get carried on.
Yeah. So maybe there are all the, like, maybe that is why they needed, like, a lot of women, is that We don't have any idea how many there are total. Like, it's not impossible that basically he is only getting them like every like 10 years or something.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, overall, I really did enjoy the movie quite a bit.
Yeah, I was really also expecting it to be kind of good bad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really sweet movie. Like, it's a nice love story in a way that I did not expect.
And I normally am not like, you said earlier, like, oh, the woman having to fix the man, and essentially stay in an abusive situation. And if you're good enough, he'll stop hitting you. But it really didn't play it that way, and he did initiate like his own change, and she more just inspired him of like, oh, there's a reason to live, not just like, bury myself under a boulder so I don't eat people. I can actually enjoy my life. And then he had kind of his own process of growing it. I wonder, can you hear my dog yawning? Is that going to come up?
Yes.
Oh, you might be on.
Oh, you
You're
might be on
gonna
the
famous.
podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Mama. Yeah, I really like that. I actually, this inspired me to watch a bunch of other movies that are like remakes of Beauty and the Beast or like similar type. I found a list on Letterboxd, and it was called Women and the Monsters They Want to Fuck. And so I started going through those. One I have not been able to find is a Polar Bear King, which is apparently like a guy doesn't want to marry a witch, and she's like, well, if you don't marry me, then you can't marry anyone because I'm going to make you a polar bear. Which,
I mean, fair.
Yeah, I mean, revenge body,
Yeah.
And so then she turns him into a polar bear, and then he can't turn back to a person unless he like finds love. I think I'm not sure like why. I don't know if he just accidentally falls in love or like it's like, well, even though you're a polar bear, like you still have to get married or I don't really know.
Yeah.
But a girl ends up falling in love with him or a woman, and so then like they have to like deal with like, oh, but like you're a bear. But I haven't been able to find that one. It was not an English language movie or like fairy tale it's based off of. But I did watch like 5 lousy remakes of Beauty and the Beast, and none of them do a successful job of like really making the male lead like likable. Like you don't want her to be with him.
Right.
You just want her to like get out of there. And they're all very much the like, what do you mean you like him now? Like why? Why?
Right.
Like a scene ago you were running from him, and then now like you're excited to be with him. So I really did appreciate that this took, the woman and monster, but did it in a way that I actually was rooting for them to be together.
Yeah, and like it makes the trajectory make sense without taking away agency.
Yeah, and it was more of a satisfying like romantic story, which arguably these other movies are supposed to be, because you actually see the relationship develop the whole time and that kind of progression of different things.
Yeah, so anything else in particular that you wanted to say about the film before moving to the next section?
No, I think I said everything I wanted to about fire sperm, so I think we're good.
Yes.
That was really one of the main things I wanted to get out on this podcast.
Fair. Very fair.
Had to tell the world.
Think about the fire sperm, everybody. Just reflect. Just reflect on fire sperm. The next section, Vera et falso, or true and false, is where I typically talk about things that the movie got right and wrong. Obviously, this is a somewhat different situation than a lot of the things that I cover that are more standard historical fiction, in that this is very much fantasy, so to some extent they can really do whatever they want. But I did still, though, because that's the point of this podcast, want to note a couple of details that I found striking in regard to that. One is that I appreciated I actually looked up the history of puppetry and confirmed that puppetry does date back to a very, very long time ago. We've discovered material remains that we think are puppets from ancient Egypt. And there's written evidence talking about puppet shows from ancient Greece from the 5th century BCE. So like Aristotle and Plato talk about puppet shows at some point. So yeah, the puppets actually fit within its medieval style context. Although the one exception to that would be that these seem to be a type of puppets that I would characterize as flat figure puppets. Like they're not 3-dimensional. And those seem to have become more of a thing in the 19th century. A more medieval style puppet would have been a more like 3D doll kind of puppet. but still, I appreciate that puppetry was a real thing. I also found the costumes really interesting, in particular the ones that you see the brides wearing at their wedding, or wedding / being kidnapped by dragons.
Slash ritual murder.
Right, they're wedding / ritual murders. In that they are, to some extent, their own thing and own design, but there are ways in which they look like they're inspired by a couple of different traditions, which are themselves probably to some extent related. One is that I spent some time looking at traditional Russian wedding outfits, and they actually do bear some similarity to those. So I think for that kind of thing, it's sort of hard to tell exactly how they developed, because often we don't have that much material evidence of that kind from the medieval world, but they certainly seem to be things that I think we actually have, like 16th, 17th century examples, and they were considered by then already to be a fairly traditional costumes. They probably do date back further.
Yeah, that was one of the things when I messaged you about it. I said I was really excited to have it on. As far as what you were going to share was to hear about some of that, of the art style of the costumes. So that's interesting to hear, like, what that kind of comes from.
Yeah, so that worked for me. And the other analog that I noticed is that some of them do actually seem, the headdresses in particular, do actually seem to me like they have some connection to the kind of headdresses that you see in mosaic depictions of Byzantine empresses. So in particular, there's an amazing 6th century example that's found in the city of Ravenna in Italy that depicts the Emperor Justinian and his wife Theodora with their retinues. And she's a pretty cool figure, since she was an actress and, according to some sources, a prostitute, who then ended up becoming the empress and becoming a pretty powerful figure. And but we have this amazing mosaic of her, and she has this very, very elaborate headdress, which is kind of similar to these, actually.
Is that with Byzantine as your?
Yes.
I've heard that term, but is it mainly where Italy is now? Is that where that was located, or is that just where the mural was?
That's just where the mosaics were. So the center of the Byzantine Empire is actually Constantinople, which is now Istanbul.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah, because basically what happens is in the 4th century, the Roman Empire becomes divided in half, and the western half of the Roman Empire falls. The eastern half of the Roman Empire doesn't. It just keeps going. And at various points, they end up taking over parts of Italy, which had been part of the Western Roman Empire. After that is no longer a going concern, but are to do not keep hold of that in any permanent way, and in fact end up basically then being semi-conquered by the Italians at some point in the 13th century, but that's a different story.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I never was really sure exactly where that was.
Yeah, and the term Byzantine is actually a modern term, essentially, that we use because in their own time they would have just said we're the Roman Empire, but historians feel like that's likely confusing, because when people think of the Roman Empire, that's not what they think of. And so the term Byzantine comes from an older name for what became the city of Constantinople, and so that then gets used. And then the city then comes to be named Istanbul at some point after it's conquered by the Ottoman Turks in 1453.
Okay. Well, thank you.
But yeah, so the Byzantine Empire lasts until then, so a full millennium, basically, after the Western Roman Empire, which is cool. There are also then a couple of things that, again, it is fantasy, but in which they are not quite right on, or that they clearly made up as opposed to drawing on real medieval sources in a super meaningful way. The first is a very just brief note that we see them walking on snowshoes at the beginning, and so I decided to look up the history of snowshoes. And while they would have had snowshoes in this region going back even much further than this, they would have been basically flat leather ones, whereas the ones that we see them walking on are these kind of webbed design, which is actually a North American, Native American innovation, which no one knew of or used in Europe anywhere until after they conquered the New World and then stole that from all the people they murdered.
Got it.
And then the ritual itself, I was trying to figure out if there were any medieval antecedents, and there's really not much. The idea of there being human sacrifice is certainly something that you find in some non-Christian medieval contexts. In particular, the closest analog is probably that in the case of sort of Viking elites who would die, they would sometimes end up basically killing off a slave, a woman slave of his household, who would then be sent along with him into death.
Mm-hmm.
And this would often involve a ship burial, but like it would be like his ship burial, and she'd be like put on his boat with him, as opposed to getting her own boat.
Or staying alive.
Or staying alive, yes, which would have been nice. That would have been the best situation, yeah. Would have been her not dying. That would have been cool. There were a lot of brides having ritual baths, but it's not the same as being sent out into a lake, either to die or not to die. They're, just more normal baths.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, just a quick note, is that in comparison to a lot of the description of wedding feasts in particular, so the ones that I was looking at in particular is that I was looking at some non-Christian examples, including both some medieval Russian wedding practices, many of which had a kind of combination of Christian elements and elements that were probably from pre-Christian polytheistic cultures, and then also Viking wedding rituals, especially since there actually were Viking communities in what is now Russia and Ukraine. And in fact, our best description of a Viking ship burial actually comes from that region as opposed to from Norway, or as opposed to from Scandinavia.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was looking around at those, one of the things that really sticks out as a big part of wedding traditions that does not show up in this movie is there is apparently so much alcohol. Just like so much, just everyone is supposed to be drunk. Like it is officially basically considered part of the wedding feast for the bride and groom to get drunk. And I believe in the Russian ones, the bride even has this, after her ritual bath, which is before the wedding, she has this thing that's basically a bachelorette party.
Oh.
Where she and some like women attendants all get super drunk, and then she like gets married the day after that or 2 days after that, whatever it is.
Got it. Now, this is a little bit off. I didn't ask you this in advance, so I don't know if you have an answer ready for it. But I mostly am aware of like dragon legends as more as far as Western Europe. Was that also a thing that was super like? Did Russia or Ukraine have their own dragon stories? And if so, like, did those vary, or did they have, like, different type of mythological figures, or did that kind of bleed over so it's hard to know what came from where?
Yeah, so that's actually a perfect lead-in to the next section, actually, the Historia Veritas section, which is that I wanted to actually talk in particular about the legend of St. George and the Dragon as being the most popular dragon legend, and in particular being one that is shared between Eastern and Western Europe. And yeah, because there does seem to have been some amount of back and forth, and as I said, this legend in particular seems to have been one that the earliest version is actually an Eastern European one. It seems to be, I think, a Georgian one dating back to the 11th century. And then gets popularized in Western Europe as well. And so St. George and the legend of him killing a dragon is, as I said, probably in the medieval world at least the most popular dragon legend. And so this is somebody who was allegedly, at least I think there's some questions to some extent about his historicity, but allegedly at least a 4th century soldier who ends up becoming venerated as a saint, and is also somebody who's really a crossover figure in terms of being extremely popular in a lot of different parts of the world. And so today, for example, he's actually the patron saint of Georgia, Ethiopia, England, and Catalonia.
Yeah,
and there actually is kind of very sweet, actually, the St. George's Day in Catalonia, the Dia de Sant Jordi, is actually a like Valentine's Day kind of thing, although it's in April, but where you exchange a book and a rose with your partner, which I think is a really nice tradition and actually much cooler than Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
And they have like book fairs in Barcelona on the Dia de Sant Jordi, which is awesome.
What day is that?
April 23rd.
April 23rd. Well, okay, let's do it.
Yeah. Should like do that as I really wanted to catch on in America as like better than Valentine's Day.
Right?
The weather's also nicer.
Cool.
The original stories about St. George didn't actually have the dragon in them, though, which is interesting, because you first start to have these legends about him that are just about him doing your kind of standard saintly miracles in the 5th and 6th centuries. And already by then, too, he's a figure who is really popular in both Eastern and Western Europe. That, in fact, we have Greek hagiographies of him dating back to the 5th century, but also Latin ones dating back to the 6th, which is something that kind of indicates that, in both a kind of Greek-speaking and a Latin-speaking world, this is a popular figure. The story of him fighting this dragon is an 11th century one, as I said, but then in the Western world really gets popularized in part by a text from the 13th century. So this is this text called the Golden Legend, which has an assortment of stories about saints, including ones that are featured in the New Testament, which is basically like Bible fanfic. A lot of it is basically stuff that people thought of as being part of the New Testament gospel narrative of the life of Jesus and the people around him, but is not in there at all. It's like just other stuff that was kind of legendary accretions that kind of grew up. And to some extent, that's also happening with some of the saints, too, is that there's some amount of embellishment on other stories. So it describes the story of St. George and talks about that there's this city, and there's a dragon who's in this city and all over the place is basically killing people. So it doesn't specifically initially have this concern about women, but that then comes up pretty quickly. So it says that there's an ordinance made in this town that the children and all of the young people should be gathered up, and then basically they'll cast lots, and anyone who the lots get cast on gets delivered to the dragon. So then one day the person who ends up getting put in that position is the king's daughter, and the king is not happy about this and tries to basically bribe people to let him keep his daughter, and they all say, no, you're the one who made this law in the first place, and all our kids died, so now your kid has to die too. So he delivers his daughter, he talks about how upset he's going to be that he's never going to see her get married, and then does what he's supposed to do. It actually then says, even in this too, that he arrayed his daughter like she should be wedded and embraced her, kissed her, and gave her the benediction, and after led her to the place where the dragon was.
That is pretty similar then. That's where the wedding murder dragon all comes together.
Right. Yeah, and she's sitting and she's waiting for the dragon to eat her, and then St. George shows up and he sees her and she says, like, what are you doing waiting here? And he says, no, and she's like, oh no, like, you should take off, the dragon's gonna come. But then basically he insists on staying and killing the dragon, and ultimately does, and because he has Jesus on his side and he makes the sign of the cross, he's able to kind of go forward, and he stabs and hurts the dragon. He actually then tells the woman to give me her girdle, her kind of fancy belt, and bind it about the neck of the dragon and be not afeared. When she had done so, the dragon followed her as it had been a meek beast and debonair. And then she led him into the city, and the people fled by mountains and valleys. And she said, alas, alas, and said, alas, alas, we shall all be dead. And then St. George is like, no, this is like proving that Jesus is a thing and that you should all believe in Jesus. And then they all agree to become Christians.
Wow. So he really capitalizes on that to, like, frighten people into converting.
Yep. And which is very much like common in the stories of 4th century saints, is that this is a big period of, it's relatively early in the history of Christianity. He was active in a period before the Roman Empire had embraced Christianity and therefore made it, at the time that he was alive, it was not even, at least for part of his lifetime at least, Christianity was not actually even a legal religion.
Mm-hmm.
And this like the one time when Christians arguably were actually oppressed was in the lifetime of St. George.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so this is very much like a theme in the lives of these early saints, is that they perform these miracles, and these miracles inspire people to convert. One of the things that's really interesting, though, is that in this story, the woman plays at least a noticeable role, that she's not the most active, she doesn't have a ton of agency, but she is at least a figure who is presented as at least being the kind of cause for action on his part, if nothing else, and that she does eventually, to some extent, participate in the kind of presentation of this miracle, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she gets to be in charge of the dragon for a little bit.
Right.
And she also tells him, hey, like, maybe don't hang around here and get snacked on. So that's pretty cool of her.
Yeah, and one of the things things, however, that's really interesting and a big contrast with this film is that when you look at your standard medieval paintings, this is true of both Eastern, Western ones of St. George and the Dragon, it's all about St. George.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see him driving a spear through the neck of this dragon. She's either not in the painting or she's kind of shunted off to the side. And the foreground is all St. George killing the dragon, and she's like off hidden somewhere.
Now, does it end with her marrying anyone, like the dragon or St. George?
I believe she actually becomes a nun or something.
Oh wow, she's so inspired that she never gets married.
Yeah, which is not bad on the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for her, gone out of there.
Yeah. So and at least some versions, I think she ends up becoming a nun, because I think at some point there's this you rescued her, you should marry her, and he's like, no, because Jesus.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think she's also like, cool, yeah, Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Good for her.
Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, it is also interesting that we have this narrative in which a woman actually does play at least a very visible role in the life of this male saint in this like very spectacular episode, and she then gets kind of cut out.
Right.
So it's nice to see in this medieval representation of a dragon story that she in fact really has the central role in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Do we know which side, like, who added the dragon first? I know you said it was in there by, like, 11th century in Eastern Europe. So is it probably from that side of things, or?
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
That's at least the earliest version that we have, and so based on manuscript evidence and things like that, most scholars think that it's a story that started in Eastern Europe and then moved west.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Everybody's got dragons.
Yeah, are there any other saints that killed, like, mythical creatures, or is it, like, St. George gets to do that?
He's the biggest one who really has this dragon element. There's, sometimes there's, like, a dragon thing that happens with St. Michael, but that tends to be a little more of a kind of symbolic, like, the dragon as, like, a demon or the devil.
Oh, okay. And this is just literal, like, no, straight up, it was eating all the sheep, it was a big deal.
Right, yeah.
He stabbed them.
Yeah. A lot of the dragon stories that we have, seem to have been things that were very much inspired by not entirely Christian mythologies. And so, for example, Beowulf's a really good example of this story that has a dragon is basically the kind of last monster and the one that ultimately defeats Beowulf after he kills the first two. That then he fights a dragon. And it's an interesting poem in that it is one that clearly has some amount of Christian influence, but also is very connected in a lot of ways to stories that probably are stories that are circulating in a pre-Christian period as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take it.
Yeah, and dragons definitely get to some extent domesticated, oddly to say, by Christians as being these mythical creatures, but that specifically are mythical creatures that are easy to connect with the devil.
Right, because there's the thing in Revelations where there's a dragon and it waves its tail and then a bunch of stars fall down. So they just like adopt the whole dragon thing. What about like unicorns or something? Like, is anyone like kissing?
Oh, they love unicorns.
Yeah.
Oh, they love unicorns because unicorns are metaphorically kind of Jesus.
Yeah, but like, are there any saints that like hang out with a unicorn?
It tends to be not quite as much saints, but it's something that you see as this symbol in a lot of vernacular romances, and it shows up a lot in art as well as this kind of symbol of women's purity, that they're able to get a unicorn to hang with them.
I see. Okay. And then once they get married, no more unicorns? So were unicorns just hanging out at like nuns' monasteries all the time?
Apparently, yeah. They've just kind of like got these like forests of unicorns just chilling.
Yeah. What if that was the test that people did to see if you were a virgin or not? Was they just were like, will this unicorn let you ride it, or will it like not let you touch it anymore?
They'll be like, nah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
And then there's this unicorn hunt tapestry, which for part of it, it treats the unicorn as just any kind of any normal animal. And then at the end is this weird thing where the unicorn sort of gets killed, but then at the end it's alive because it's also kind of Jesus.
Oh, sure.
So it got like unfairly killed, but then resurrected.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess that's pretty on brand.
Yeah.
So unicorns are Jesus and pure maidens hang out with them.
Yeah.
All right. Well. Guess I can't argue with that.
Yeah, you know.
Okay, cool.
But it does the image of the unicorn did have some like crossover appeal as well, but there was Jewish usage of unicorns that seems to have kind of ignored the Jesus thing, which there is somebody I know who's working on that a bit now, and I'd be interested to hear more about exactly what's happening there.
I want to hear that. Should interview
Yeah.
them when they're done with their thing.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right.
So for our next segment, the Fabula Nostra section, this is an opportunity for us to talk about what perhaps alternative movie we might make inspired by this one.
I mean, I really enjoyed it. I feel like the main change I would want to see would be like that sky sex, honestly. Just go for it. I want to know that they're having sex in the sky before, like, you know, once he's out for safety's sake, before they, like, actually land in the ocean or, like, hit the ground. He turns into a dragon. They do a cool swoopy thing. And they're just like, gosh, this is exhilarating. This is great. So really just editing that ending scene, I think. I mean, I think also having a horror version where she is like obsessed with him and is helping him like lure women to be like burned alive so that they can like have more children. Like she goes crazy when she finds out that she can't have a child with him, and then that is like the spiral it takes. But
that would be the intense like horror sequel.
Yeah, well, no, I don't want it as a sequel because I would just be sad if they like ruined this one. But I think that would be like an interesting take on like someone, a human paired up with a magical creature, or like if, you know. And I feel like there's a little bit of that with some vampire stories of like they have like a human that's like interested in them and they'll, you know, help follow them, or but really like going all the way with that of like of them luring victims and like that obsession, I think would be really interesting. But I think just having another movie kind of like this would just be really fun. I really enjoyed it, and just a little sexier, I guess. But I'm pretty on board with it. Maybe like if it was remade like in America. Gosh, it's kind of hard to think of like who I would want in it. There's so many people that would be weird choices. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe just do an American remake that's like on HBO or something, so it's a little hotter and heavier.
Right.
You know, it's hotter and heavier version, but it's mostly the same type of story.
Right.
I think
let it have an earned R rating.
Yeah, you know, just really go for it. But that would really kind of be it. Yeah. What about you?
I think the thing is that I really, really liked the way in which I think this film did ultimately earn their relationship in a lot of ways and developed it really well. I would, however, like to see a story that was connected to this kind of narrative, but that maybe didn't begin with a kidnapping. I'm pretty sure that I'm kind of actually stealing my idea to some extent from a series that I read when I was a kid called Dealing with Dragons.
Oh, I really like that series. Yeah.
Yeah, by Patricia Reed, but that I think that actually does basically begin, if I'm remembering correctly, or at least this is my idea, and I think this is similar, that it begins with her basically showing up and kind of moving in with this dragon because she doesn't want to get married.
Yeah, and she's hoping that all the knights will get burned up so she doesn't have to live with one of them.
Right, and so I think that would be an interesting take, that she just kind of shows up and decides she's gonna do that because she's like, ugh, I'm supposed to marry this guy, and he's making this big deal of the fact that he's like the dragon, like the grandson of the dragon slayer, but he's actually a huge wimp, and I think that if I go and find a dragon, that he's just, and like hang out with the dragon, that he's gonna just wimp out.
Yeah, no, I like that idea.
Yeah, and so she does that, but then have it similarly be something where she falls in love with him, and yeah, so I think that would be fun.
Yeah, I like that. That just adds a little bit more agency for her.
Yeah, and if I did this in the United States as a remake, I would go with my heart and my like feelings as I was watching this movie and realize that it actually does have to be Robert Pattinson. I'm not sure I'm happy about it, but it has to be.
Yeah, I like that. I would watch it. You know, I would be like, oh, I can't believe they made this, and I'd go see it, and I'd love it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think it'd be fun, and yeah. So yeah, so I'm kind of combining this movie and dealing with dragons, although I think the dragon there is just like her buddy. I don't think it turns out to be a sexy dude.
I think, I think the one other piece that could be cool is having something where she gets to do some fighting. Like if there's some sort of
Yeah.
like there's some other like monster that is actually bad, and she gets to
Mhm.
like if she rode him as a dragon and then like used a lance to like stab like a evil bird
Right.
thing, or something like that could be cool of them like really
Yeah.
teaming up. But yeah,
Or just her
otherwise,
punching Igor in the face would be satisfying.
yeah. Like as
Like
she's
she
getting
deserves a
lifted
punch
into
in
the
the
air by
face.
the dragon, she just like kicks them on their
Yeah.
way. Like,
Like
get
that
out
would be
of here.
nice. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
So this now comes the time when we get to rate the film on a scale of 1 to 5. This can be based on any criteria that you want.
So I would say I would give this a 4 out of 5 because it's not. Or if I use Letterboxd to track and rate movies, I think I would give it a 3 there, but I'd give it a heart. Like it's like, look,
Okay.
I know this isn't like award winning. I know this isn't groundbreaking. I mean, doing like that type of plot where it's not like creepy or like
Yeah.
be abused. It's cool because you're a woman. That's kind of groundbreaking, but
Yeah.
it's
I
not
wish it wasn't, but
right. But it's not so unique or so well done where there's this. It deserves like a 4 or 5 rating, but I'd give it like a 3 with a heart
yeah,
because you can like favorite
that's
movies.
fair.
So movies where I'm like, this is
Mhm.
amazing, but like this would be something I'd watch again for fun. That would be the rating I
Yeah.
would give it. Would be a 3 and a heart. But if there's no heart, I'd give it a 4 because I think that I really enjoyed it. I've seen it twice. I'll probably see it again at some point.
I genuinely enjoyed this. I was impressed by the extent to which this remained her story and gave her agency and is like a nice love story. I'm ultimately going to give it a 3, and that's in part, I would say, because this is ultimately a medieval history focused podcast, and I think this movie could have. I think it would have been interesting to like. I think it's really interesting when fantasy draws on medieval realities in very kind of deep and interesting ways. I always find that fun. It's not a prerequisite for fantasy, obviously, and I like plenty of fantasy that doesn't do that, but it's something that, for me as an expert in this, really enriches the world building aspect when I can get that sense of it having these kind of connections to a real world. And I think maybe they could have done a little, like they could have like done a little more than that. That this feels like a very fantastical realm, and it's kind of hard to connected in meaningful ways with anything beyond a kind of folkloric fairy tale sort of realm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so that would be something that I would have especially been excited to see. It would have been that, and so by virtue, really, just of this being a kind of history focused podcast, I'm going to knock it down to a 3.
All right, that's fair.
So, are there places where the listeners of Media-eval could find you on the internet if they so desired?
Well, yes. First off, I would like to tell you where to find this movie on the internet because I would
Oh,
love
yes,
for more people to
absolutely.
see it.
Definitely.
And it is right now on Tubi TV, TUBI TV, which is a free app and website that will put in like a couple of commercial breaks, but really not that many. And it's also on IMDb TV free, which is another free one with commercials. So you can search on it in like Amazon Prime, and then it'll
Right.
take you to like the IMDb TV version. So everyone can see it for free. So go see it, and it's not very long, and it's very pretty. So go for it. As for me, I'm in the Facebook group. So if anyone listens in there in the group and they're like, oh, Christine Fredrickson, are there 2 of those and only one of them's in the group and it's not the one on the podcast? No, that's me. You put the pieces together. I don't really use Twitter, but on Instagram, my name is Momo and Christine. MOMO period Christine CHRISTINE. And I would say 3/4 of it is pictures of just Momo, my little dog. He's like 8 pounds and very cute. And then occasionally I'll be in a picture, or I'll have a picture of me like taking a selfie in a new dress, or like me with a friend. But it's almost all my dog. So if you like little fluffy dogs, I Probably post pictures a couple times a week of him.
And I can confirm that he's very cute, having seen him in while recording as well as photos previously.
Thank you.
So.
I appreciate that.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app, and please rate and review Media-eval on Apple Podcasts. And I will read all new 5-star reviews in future episodes. It's been a little while since I've had one, so I don't have one to read in this episode. So if you are listening, please take that as inspiration to write us a review. Please also follow the podcast on Twitter at Media-eval-pod and join our Facebook group, which you can find by searching Media-eval. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at SarahIfDucker. The Twitter occasionally has historical comments, and the Instagram is almost entirely pictures of my dog and cat. So if you're interested in more pet pictures, all sorts of opportunities. If you have any questions or suggestions, I would also love to hear from you via email at media.evalpod@gmail.com.
Are there specific types of questions that you're looking for, or what kind of things do you want from people?
I've actually been thinking, that's a good opportunity for me to say, I've been actually thinking about, this can be the formal announcement, I've been thinking about instituting an Ask a Medievalist segment. So
that.
if you have any questions about medieval history, please feel free to shoot me an email, and I will answer your questions about the medieval world on the podcast.
Cool. Let's do it.
Yeah. So, all right, Christine, thank you so much for guesting and for introducing me to this movie, which is a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you all for listening to Media-eval. Bye.
Bye.
Почему они поют драконью песню? Чтоб напомнить, что дед его был драконоборцем.